This is my thesis defense. It's the deep learning application and development for cephalometric landmark identification. Here's the overview. We're going to do background and literature, go over the specific aims for the project, review the materials and methods, and discuss the results. Do a model demonstration, look at limitations and future directions, and then make some acknowledgments. So starting with the background and literature. So this, as we all know, is a lateral cephalogram. And a lateral cephalogram is a two-dimensional radiographic image of the head and neck taken from the lateral view that illustrates where the dentition lies relative to the skeletal bases. So every patient that walks into our clinic for treatment will have a lateral cephalogram and a panoramic x-ray. Now, plenty of dentists will take panoramic x-rays to look for pathology and assess the dentition development, but interpreting and making use of the lateral cephalogram is really what makes orthodontics a specialty. For clinicians, these images relay clinically diagnostic information for orthodontic and orthognathic treatment planning and helps predict future growth patterns. Specifically, it lets you look at the dentition and its alveolar housing and figure out the relation to the rest of the skeletal structures. With this information, the orthodontist can then determine the global movements that need to take place so we can fit the teeth, which are the pieces of the puzzle, together properly. Lateral cephalograms are also relied upon by the researchers guiding advancements in the field because cephalometric analysis is a key tool to study dental and skeletal development, outcomes, and the relationships dental and skeletal characteristics have with factors such as genetics or the environment. To standardize their interpretation, orthodontists and oral surgeons have identified several key landmarks along the skull and soft tissue profile and extract information from the angular and linear measurements between them. Originally, all of this was done by hand, but now software exists that calculates the relationships between landmarks once identified. However, there is no standardized software currently in use to relieve the burden of actual landmark identification from the clinician. This task is labor-intensive and time-consuming, taking approximately 5 minutes per radiograph. But more importantly, it's also difficult and subjective, which introduces significant inter-observer variability to their interpretation. As a result, most clinicians will not even trace cephalograms in clinical practice, and instead choose to simply use the information available from a quick big picture glance at the image. The unavoidable presence of human error in annotation also impacts the research guiding the field, as it introduces large inter-observer and intra-observer errors that can cloud research outcomes. Because of this, we believe an automated method for cephalometric landmark identification that could match or even outperform human clinicians would be a significant clinical and academic advancement for orthodontics. However, we're not the first group to attempt this research. In fact, it predates Bill Clinton's presidency, the first Top Gun, AIM Messenger, Rise and Fall of Tupac and Biggie, and me. So 1984 was a really exciting year for science. NASA astronaut Bruce McCandless took the first untethered spacewalk. Macintosh announced the sale of its first personal computer during this iconic Super Bowl ad, which was really big and looked like this. And perhaps most excitingly, Dr. Cohen built the first AI model for landmark identification and published his findings in the British Journal of Orthodontics. The original work relied on active shape models. So this is an iterative statistical technique where the model is first trained on a set of images that are landmarked, and then the model is deformed to match the new presented image in a way that minimizes the error between the model and new data set. As interest increased, Rolfing developed a neural network-based model in 1986, which is a type of machine learning algorithm that is trained to identify patterns in data. Sorry, I think someone's not muted. If you could mute yourself, please. Thank you. These two methods were combined by Vanier, who developed a model that worked through a combination of both active shape models and neural networks. Interest grew throughout the 90s and 2000s, and the models were further refined, leading to a significant improvement in their accuracy and efficiency. However, it was a transition to the more robust random forest algorithms in 2010 that represented a turning point and drastically increased academic interest in the field. So in 2014, the International Symposium on Biomedical Imaging announced a worldwide challenge, which invited teams to compete in automatic cephalometric X-ray landmark identification. The team with the most successful model was Linder and Coutts, and they created a random forest regression-based model that has 73.68% accuracy within 2 millimeters. And the training set used included an estimated 400 annotated lateral cephalograms. The original poster is no longer available, but that's what the quoted literature says, so I believe it was around 400. So what does this 2 millimeter standard mean? On this X-ray, we'll consider the black point the true location of labialis superior, which is the most prominent point on the upper lip. The green circle represents a target area within a radius of 2 millimeters around the true location. Anytime the landmark location predicted by the model falls within this radius, it's considered a successful detection rate within 2 millimeters. So overall, Linder and Coutts' model was able to detect the landmark 73.68% of the time within this 2 millimeter radius. And how did they accomplish this? They did this by creating a model that was based on these random forest algorithms. So random forest algorithms rely on a type of machine learning where a large number of decision trees are constructed to analyze the features of the data set, and then their predictions are accumulated for a final outcome. So think of decision trees like a classic yes-no flow chart, each asking different questions to get to the final answer. We use them all the time in dentistry. In fact, this one is straight out of Profit's chapter for handling crossbites. So the algorithm works like this, but with several decision trees working in conjunction. Think of it like you have 4 experts, and you show them a picture and ask what animal it is, and each expert is using their own decision tree. So one's like, it's a duck because it has wings and a beak. And the other says it's a duck because it's yellow and feathers. And then someone says it's a duck because it floats and breathes air. And then imagine you have one expert who says that's definitely a goldfish because it's yellow and it's in a pond. Well, then you have 3 experts saying it's a duck, and one says it's a goldfish, and they've all reached this decision through different logic trees by focusing on different features. So then you go with majority rules and say 3 out of 4 says it's a duck, so it must be a duck. That's how the random forest algorithms work. So then Dr. Upadhyay expanded on this by creating his own random forest algorithm, starting with 253 annotated images. However, he had the novel approach of taking his annotated images and then also slightly altering them through techniques like zoom, horizontal shifts, vertical shifts, shearing, rotations, and elastic transformations. This increased the training data 6-fold, which also introduced the model to more variability, helping to make it more robust. So if you're interested in this, you can read more in his paper that was published in October 2022. The increased training set size significantly reduced the test error as expected. However, similar to other regression-based algorithms by other developers, the model's performance with landmark identification did not reach clinical significance. This was likely because these models were built on smaller data sets with training images measuring in the hundreds. Furthermore, the decision trees used in their implementation are very sensitive to the data they have been trained on and perform poorly when small changes to the image sets are introduced, such as new radiographs taken on different machines. So where do we go from here? The answer involves this, and this, and this. So each of these examples rely on deep learning, as do most new attempts at automatic cephalometric identification. So the researchers and engineers moved away from regression models and are now building deep learning models. And so what is deep learning? It's a subset of machine learning that makes use of special algorithms called neural networks. And neural networks do this because they model the biologic system of the brain. So they're nonlinear networks composed of artificial neurons, which are capable of receiving input from multiple other neurons, and they together trigger an output signal further up the spectrum, like submission and action potentials. The most popular type of deep learning network used for our purposes is the convolutional neural network, a type of algorithm capable of assigning importance to different features in an image in different people. So we plan to create a user-friendly web interface to execute the model on. This would offer the opportunity to obtain additional cephalograms for improving the algorithm, as well as making it accessible for educational and clinical tools for anyone interested in its use, which means we get to use it when we leave, which is exciting. And to help determine the potential usefulness of the model, we would also like to compare the accuracy of the model to clinicians with varying levels of experience. This is something that has never been assessed by prior studies. Our model's performance will be compared to orthodontic residents with varying levels of experience, practicing clinicians who have completed residency, and our expert-trained annotator to see how the algorithm ranks and if it could be a useful tool for educational settings, clinical practice, and research applications. A final advancement we would like to achieve is creating a new gold standard for determining whether the model has successfully predicted the location of the landmark. In the 2014 ISBI Challenge Guidelines, an annotation was defined as accurate if it was less than 2 millimeters from the target location, because this was deemed the acceptable accuracy of a landmark in clinical practice. And this is a notion that's widely reflected in the literature, with most papers defining their model's accuracy based on its ability to identify landmarks within 2 millimeters of its true location, claiming this is an acceptable range in clinical practice. But is it? Most papers heavily cross-cite each other and never back to a true study that proves this is an acceptable metric. I think this sentence in a published article sums it up best when it literally just wrote, some paper referenced by Wang. It seems this 2 millimeter benchmark for clinical significance is unfounded, and no studies have been done to determine that this level of accuracy is actually clinically useful or mimics human performance. As demonstrated in the bullseye above, on the upper lip, 2 millimeters of error is rather large. Imagine the effect on an A and B angle if A point was placed 2 millimeters anterior and B point was placed 2 millimeters posterior. For this reason, several researchers have claimed this measure of success could be too lenient and have begun using a 1 millimeter radius as their definition of accurate instead of 2 millimeters. But again, there is no basis for claiming this is a clinically accurate level either. Therefore, we would like to establish a new gold standard for inter-expert variability, which can be used as a new standard for success for each landmark. By having two experts annotate the same large dataset, a standardized range for inter-expert variability for each landmark can be established, to which the model's performance can be compared. This will help us truly determine if the model is performing as accurately as a human expert. So overall, the aim of our study is to develop a robust and versatile algorithm capable of identifying the skeletal and soft tissue landmarks on lateral cephalograms that are commonly evaluated in orthodontics. And we have three objectives. The first is to develop an image recognition model based on deep learning for automatic localization of landmarks on patient x-rays using feature extraction, edge detection, and landmark-dependent criteria unique to each landmark. The second objective is to analyze the performance of the AI algorithm to current standards of landmark identification. And the third is to develop a drag-and-drop web application with intuitive user interface for others to utilize the algorithm. So I'm going to go through the materials and methods. This was our infrastructure setup. So lateral cephalograms were collected from 6 different centers in the United States and Jordan. And in total, 5,448 images were collected, and all patient data and location of the collection were de-identified. Because all data was anonymized, IRB approval was not required. Inclusion criteria was that all images had to be lateral cephalograms taken of patients with or without fixed orthodontic appliances, implants, and/or surgical bone plates, and they could be taken before, during, or after orthodontic treatment. Exclusion criteria was images of poor quality that landmark identification was not even possible. The computational power necessary to run the model exceeds the abilities of most personal computers. Additional graphic processing units were purchased from Amazon Web Services to accommodate this demand. DigitalOcean was used to provide the hosting service for the COCO annotator application, storing the image data and the data of the landmark points. 2 individual humans served as the human experts for determining the gold standard of human error. You may recognize them. And for calibrating the other orthodontists to assist with algorithm training through landmark identification. And so now we're going to move on to how the code was engineered. The original code was an object recognition code taken from GitHub, a collaborative open source code hosting platform. So the model consisted of 2 parts, a feature extractor and a regression head. So a FissionNet B7 model was chosen as the feature extractor because it's small in size, yet the accuracy is very high. The small size allows it to be easily deployed in small compute environments and can do predictions faster than other models of larger sizes. Thus, it represents the best of both worlds, speed and accuracy. The regression head is the final set of layers that are added on top of the feature extraction layers to provide the numerical output, which is the pixel coordinates that give us the locations of the predicted landmarks. The model was given training data in the form of annotated images with the following 27 landmarks, which were chosen based on their relevance for clinical application and academic research. And the model was built through an iterative process so that any corrections the algorithm needed to undergo could be made as the algorithm developed. So training sets were provided in the form of batch groups of annotated radiographs, which we annotated on the COCO site. So basically, you would click on a training set folder and it would bring up thumbnails of 300 to 400 x-rays. From there, you select each thumbnail and it will load the radiograph and annotate it in a matter of seconds using the latest version of the model. So here you can see the basic process. And as I said, the training image would be loaded and annotated by the current version of the software in seconds. And the human annotator would then make corrections as needed by dragging each landmark to its true location. So here I've overlaid a human corrected image with the one that was annotated by the model. So anywhere there's duplicity in the landmark point, that means the landmark's location was corrected by the human. The model would then use these corrections as training data for its next stage of improvements. So here at the top, you can see what we just discussed. You have the model predicting the landmark locations shown in yellow. They're corrected by the human shown in blue. And this provides training data to improve the model's performance. However, a second source of training data was also used. As employed by Dr. Upadia's previous study, data augmentation was also used to artificially increase the training set size. So human annotated images were further augmented through techniques that included random rotation, flipping, random translation in any direction, changing the brightness, and gamma correction. This error-specific multiple augmentation technique made the model very robust because the model is receiving significantly more varied training data while requiring minimal effort on the part of the human experts. Finally, the accuracy of the model was assessed in 3 different ways. So to compare the accuracy of the model to those in the literature, a successful detection rate calculation was included, as this is how most other models report their accuracy. So the percentage of the time the landmark was successfully detected in ranges from 1 millimeters to 4 millimeters were calculated. And here you can see the depictions of a 1 millimeter and a 2 millimeter radius for reference. Multiple studies also report accuracy by calculating point-to-point error values in millimeters. So basically the pixel distance between the predicted and true location of a point is measured, and this pixel distance is converted to millimeters using a conversion factor that depends on the resolution of the image. Since most studies only collect radiographs from a single center, the resolution of all their radiographs is the same, making this conversion easy. However, our study was novel in that it had a multi-center approach, which strengthened the model but complicated this conversion as each machine captures radiographs at different resolutions. To combat this, we found the average resolution and used that for our conversions. However, this led us to also measure accuracy in a third novel way based on percentage, and that was developed out of necessity by our study. So the percentage error was a way to explain the error based on the percentage of the total image dimensions. So for example, let's say the true location of Candelian, as shown in red, is at coordinates 40, 60 of this 100 by 100 grid. A 1% error would indicate that the predicted point would lie within 1% of the x and y coordinate, so the x coordinate could range from 39 to 41, and the y coordinate could range from 59 to 61. That 1% of error is indicated by the entire volume of that red circle. We believe this is a better method for measuring error in future research because it lends itself well to multi-center studies and solves the problem of error increasing as resolution increases. So the aspirational goal for this study is to create an algorithm that has an error rate similar to human experts, and in order to do that, a gold standard for human inter-expert variability needs to be established. So to accomplish this, 2 experts each annotated an identical batch of 300 x-rays, and the inter-expert variability was measured. Combined, the experts had over 20 years of experience using lateral cephalograms in clinical diagnosis and treatment planning and considerable experience with research work involving cephalometric parameters. And then finally, to gauge where the algorithm performance ranked relative to clinicians, its error was measured relative to 4 levels of orthodontic providers. These levels were first, second, and third year orthodontic residents and orthodontic providers practicing in a postgraduate clinical setting. 3 calibrated orthodontic annotators from the study determined the true location of each landmark, and in the same 30 x-rays were annotated for each group. The model then traced the same 30 images for comparison. So I'd like to give a huge thanks to everyone who donated their time and participated in this. And now the exciting part. Because there's so many parts of the study and it's a little difficult to follow, we're going to consider the results and discussion together for each section before moving on to the next set of findings. So first, we'll look at the creation of the new gold standard. You can see here, the landmark with the lowest inter-expert variability was the crown tip of the upper incisor at 0.28 millimeters, followed by the crown tip of the lower incisor and sella. Only 5 landmarks showed inter-expert variability above 1 millimeter. The highest was orbitale, which had an inter-expert variability of 1.27 millimeters, followed by soft tissue begonion, glabella, gonion, and condylion. All 5 landmarks have been shown by previous studies to have lower levels of inter-observer reliability between orthodontists, and the variation between experts in our study was notably lower than the variation in other studies. This suggests that these levels of errors are realistic standards for comparing the model to as we assess whether it's performing at human expert levels. In terms of the percentage, the average overall inter-observer error was found to be just 0.73%, which for perspective is depicted in the image area below by the tiny pink square at the bottom right side. Next, we'll look through how error decreased throughout the iterative training process. Error measured in percentage of the image area decreased with each training stage. Error started at 2.02% in stage 1 and decreased to 0.77% by stage 9. Following the initial set of training, similarly sized training sets were used for each subsequent stage. However, improvement was notably more substantial between earlier training stages and later training stages. So the overall final error achieved by the final training stage was 0.77%. Which you can see hovers only slightly above the gold standard of 0.73% error rate set by the experts. We got really close. And this is just a useful way to visualize that improvement over the stages. As you can see, the true and predicted locations of the landmark are gradually coming closer and closer as the training proceeds. The directionality of error for all landmarks in the final testing set of 319 radiographs was also assessed and represented by scatter plots. So several landmarks exhibited pronounced directionality in their errors. Glabella and soft tissue begonion showed a primarily vertical vector of error, while primarily horizontal vectors of error were seen for mesial and distal margins of the upper and lower first molars. A strong diagonal vector was seen for gonion. Glabella is defined as the most anterior point on the forehead. However, the landmark corresponds to the anterior portion of the frontal bone, which can often appear more flattened instead of having a defined curvature, making it difficult to determine an exact point of placement. The same is true for soft tissue begonion, which indicates the most prominent point on the chin. But because the observed prediction made by the model did not sway outward or inward from the skull periphery, it means the model is performing in a way that is intuitively consistent with the expectations of the human orthodontist. When considering the boundaries of the first molars and gonion, it's important to remember that lateral cephalograms are 2D illustrations of 3D structures, and that bilateral structures are superimposed onto each other in the same image. Therefore, bilateral structures can show two different borders for the same structure, and the annotator has a difficult job of determining how to best represent the location of both with a single point. This is why the boundaries of the molars are often blurred horizontally, which matches the direction of error exhibited by the model. Similarly, the left and right gonial angles often appear as two distinct structures, with one lower and closer to the outer corner of the radiograph, and the other higher and closer to the center. Not only is the human annotator estimating the best single point that represents both borders, but the model has to as well. So the imprecise nature of this would produce more error along the direction of the line connecting them. The performance of the model was also assessed in linear millimeter measurements, and the landmarks showing the lowest level of error were the upper crown tip, subnasale, and labium superius. Encouragingly, only 4 landmarks showed error greater than 1 millimeter, and these were glabella, gonion, condylion, and porion. Glabella had the greatest error of all landmarks with an average error of 1.2 millimeters. However, this was expected by the previously displayed data showing the large vertical spread in error for this point. Porion, condylion, and gonion also had errors above 1 millimeter. However, all of these points are historically difficult to landmark. Studies have even suggested closed-mouth lateral cephalogram should not be used when determining the proper location of porion and condylion. Therefore, a greater error in these locations were expected, as the training data was likely less consistent. When this is considered, the model's ability to predict the locations for these landmarks within 1.2 millimeters is incredibly promising. And for reference, you can see a 1.2 millimeter radius of error indicated by the green circle on the X-ray above. So that's how much variation we're talking about with where the model would put it. The performance of the model was then compared to the gold standard set by the experts. The gold represents the gold standard, and the purple represents the model error. While the inter-expert variability was an average of 0.73 millimeters across all landmarks, the model showed a slightly higher average error of 0.78 millimeters. Keep in mind the difference between these values is equivalent to 120th of the point, or of the little hatchings that show a millimeter above. The range in millimeters for the model is 0.55 to 1.21 millimeters, and the range for variability between experts was 0.35 to 1.27 millimeters, so the ranges were similar for both. The model showed greater error for 14 landmarks, while the experts showed greater error for 13 landmarks. So something exciting to know, if you remember from the last slide, glabella, gonion, condylion, and porion were the 4 landmarks with errors greater than 1 millimeter. However, if you look at the model's performance compared to the experts for these points, 3 of them basically matched the gold standard, suggesting that the model is actually performing at a human expert level. Next, we decided to compare the model's performance to one of the more heavily referenced models in the literature, YOLO v3, which stands for You Only Look Once, version 3, and it's one of the most popular deep learning models used for tasks like object detection and image classification, and is among the leading deep learning models used for the evaluation of automated cephalometric landmark detection. It's often referenced in the literature for its high-level performance, with the original model achieving a 2 millimeter successful detection rate within 80.4%. However, some researchers have been able to boost its performance to 85.7% with modifications. When the successful detection rate of our model was analyzed at these intervals for the 27 landmarks, its performance was substantially higher. While the original YOLO model achieved an 80.4% successful detection rate for 2 millimeters, ours was 96.4%. While this was not a direct comparison because different landmarks are being analyzed, it provides strong evidence that the current model shows very promising results. The model was also compared to one proposed by Kim in 2021. This study was published after we started work on ours, but had identified similar problems in the field of automated cephalometric research, including the need for larger data sets and multi-center data acquisition. With images acquired from 10 testing centers and a relatively large training set of 3,150 images, their model is the closest known comparison to our model, which was developed on images from 6 testing centers and used over 5,000 images in its training set. Overall, their model looked at 20 landmarks and had a 56.6% successful detection rate within 1 millimeter, while ours was at 75% for our 27 landmarks. When only mutual landmarks were examined, their model had a 60% success rate within 1 millimeter and 80% within 2, while ours reached 75% for 1 millimeter and over 96% for 2 millimeters. So that's nearly a 15% increase. So you can see on the graph here, the percentages of each landmark detected within 1 millimeter up to 2.5 millimeters. And out of the 15 mutual landmarks, our model outperformed theirs on all but 3. But for the 3 it outperformed us on, our model still performed very well. Comparatively, their models showed much less consistency. As you can see on the graph, most of our landmarks were detected within 1 millimeter, as represented by the blue, when they had many more landmarks predicted more than 1.5 millimeters away from their true location. Finally, to evaluate whether this model could serve as a clinically or educational useful adjunct, its performance was tested relative to orthodontic clinicians with 4 levels of experience: first-year residents, second-year residents, third-year residents, and clinicians working in private practice. Surprisingly, the AI outperformed all groups, even the practicing clinicians, by an entire standard deviation. This suggests that this program has multiple applications for its usage. One is as an educational tool, helping to train residents how to annotate properly and check their annotations prior to treatment planning. Another application could be clinical practice. Lateral cephalograms are useful diagnostic aids, but as we said, most clinicians do not have the time to trace them and simply use them to visually guess relations between structures, which leads to their underutilization. Utilizing a model whose accuracy appears to outperform that of the average clinician would allow practitioners to identify key landmarks and their relations in seconds rather than minutes and better guide treatment decisions. Finally, our program would likely be of significant use in research settings where lateral cephalograms are a key tool in longitudinal outcome-related research. If this program could suggest landmark locations that outperform the average clinician, it could likely act as a tool to standardize and speed up the data acquisition process. So we built this great algorithm, but how can we make it accessible? To increase access to the algorithm so that it can be used in these ways, a website was built that is currently in beta testing. Uploading a lateral cephalogram to the site will automatically populate all 27 landmarks in seconds. The user then has the ability to toggle the landmarks to a more accurate location if need be. Once the user is satisfied with the landmark positions, the website will then provide 7 of the most useful angular measurements derived from the landmarks. Additionally, the website provides short clinical descriptions matching the outcomes of these angles. This eliminates all need for coding experience and program execution, which has limited the use of previous models reported in the literature. So if you want to try it out, here's the QR code and the password. Username's AI and password's algorithm. And so here are our conclusions. So by establishing a gold standard for expert annotation performance, it could be determined that the model is performing similar to human expert levels for landmark identification of the 27 landmarks studied. And the directionality of error suggests the model is performing in a way that is intuitively consistent with the expectation of a human orthodontist. The model also outperformed 2 leading models and outperformed a small sample of practicing clinicians, first-year residents, second-year residents, and third-year residents. This suggests its clinical applicability and potential applications as teaching and research adjunct. Further improvement of the model may be hindered by the human error, though, that is unavoidable in the training data supplied to it. So there are a few limitations to our study. The first is that it was only trained in 27 landmarks, and because of the large number of training data supplied, new landmarks are not really able to be introduced at this point. Another limitation was that the findings related to comparing the model to humans with varying clinical performance should be considered preliminary, because each group contained only 5 clinicians and only 30 radiographs were analyzed per group. So future work will expand on this to determine if these preliminary findings actually reflect significant differences. And all that future work will be done by R. May. So she's going to be looking at future development of the model, how to improve it if need be. And something exciting is looking at whether these small errors in landmark identifications, like the 0.73% of the image, is that actually going to translate to errors in the angular measurements, because that's what we care about and what we use. There's also going to be some more build out of the beta website to make it more usable for everyone. And she will be doing further comparison of landmark accuracy between individuals with varying clinical experience. I'd like to thank Dr. Upadhyay for including me on this exciting project and being a wonderful mentor who has been consistently supportive throughout all of residency. He has not only set the new gold standard for landmark accuracy, but also teaching, because he's always made the residents feel like his enjoyment for teaching is a large reason he has chosen to work at UConn. And his willingness to discuss concepts and genuine support for the us has made him a favorite among both current students and graduates. Everyone always asks about you everywhere we go. I hope it'll make him happy to learn we all plan to use cantilevers in our future practice. I'd also like to thank Dr. Yadav and Dr. Tadanata for being on my committee. Dr. Yadav, you're greatly missed at UConn, and Nebraska is lucky to have you. And Dr. Tadanata, you've always advocated for the master's students and kept us on track and been willing to help us every step of the way. So I'm so thankful I've gotten to know both of you. I'd also like to thank Dr. Mehta, Dr. Sharma, and Gaurav for their help with this thesis. Dr. Mehta, I feel like your role in my residency has come full circle, from teaching me how to bond to being a leader on this project. Dr. Sharma, you're the 6th member of our class, and we all wish you were graduating with us. Thank you for finding the time to help me annotate in addition to everything else you do. And a very special thank you to Gaurav, who is the genius who built the model and knows all things AI. I'd also like to thank all the faculty at UConn for accepting me into this program and everything that's come since, and to all my co-residents who have made this a place and time in my life I'll miss. Thank you to also all these people for the help with statistical analysis, help on previous software development, and Mayan for finding all the data for this project. You're amazing. And everyone who's helped me annotate. Thank you for funding for this project, which was provided through the Office of Vice President for Research. So Dr. Upadhyay received the National Science Foundation UConn Seed Grant through the Accelerate UConn program and a preliminary proof of concept grant through the START program, which is given to new ideas with commercial implications. And I'd like to thank my dog for hanging out with me while I worked on this project, and he is now an expert annotator. If you need him, may. And that's it.